Well,
So
we're both kind of elders we're in that elder stage too, and
right.
what we're supposed to be teaching and how we blend all the things that we do. And I think, it's like, how do we still do the work without, in today's thing, like, I was talking to somebody last night about their events and using this and that and kind of coaching them. And
Hmm.
I said, I wish we could go back to just cash. I said, because cash is clean, it's easy. There's no like, here's this computer glitch and I had trouble signing up.
Hmm.
It's like really stress free.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
no fees attached to it. There's no ticket fees, convenience fees. I go, it's like
Right.
all these things. And I said, but we have to have a culture that wants to go back and adopt that model too. So it's the like,
Absolutely.
how do we do our work when spirit is kind of saying we need to kind of, unpack our dependency on technology,
Right.
and but how do we unify a community without technology today?
Right. And let me just say, there's another interview subject right there. You know, and I'm just going to say, one of my academic colleagues, Joni Siani, wrote a book called Selling Your Soul, which was years ago, which was one of the first looks into the effects of cell phone use and generally on young people. And she did this amazing kind of work around it that was very insightful and powerful. And I think, as a lot of things I've learned happen within technologies, whether they be electronic or mechanical, even like a car, in this kind of a world, industrial world, colonial world, things just show up and we start using them and we don't think about the outcomes. So I think, yeah, there's a lot to still be cognizant of, and thinking about, as our physical world changes, our spiritual world is changing, as it always does, and is requiring different things of us. And, you know, can the technologies help? Okay, yeah, we're doing this right now, and that's helpful, I would hope. But
Yeah.
yeah, there's other issues about it. Spirit has another thought about it.
Well,
It's like, oh, it's Thursday. No, for this.
right. It's funny because
Yeah.
like when it happened, one of the things I was doing on Monday is kind of setting my intentions and preparing, because we're getting ready to lead a pilgrimage in Ireland where we're going to be
Right.
really diving in on unpacking patriarchal conditioning, colonizer mentality, church indoctrination, and
Right.
all those things that were stolen from our ancestors.
Right.
And one of the goddesses we've been working with is the Morrigan. And I
Yeah.
swear she knocked my phone out of my hand because she is just no, she's just no joke.
Yeah.
But I think like this, it's how do we, like, one of the things I notice, especially in the last 5 years, is the drastic increase of cancer rates in
Yeah.
the youth because
Wow.
of cell phones.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
so, there's a reason why I don't have internet in my office.
Yeah.
That was very intentional. Spirit told me to keep it out of there.
Hmm.
Only use it if I need it. Like if I'm doing a class and I need it to be in person, I can always hotspot if I need it. So you're talking maybe a couple times a year. You're not talking like on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So, some people find it hysterical, but then I noticed there are others that come in, and the minute they walk in my door, they go, I can just drop right here,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
and some of it might be the environment I created, but I also wonder how much of it is because I don't have all the Wi-Fi and internet, streaming nonstop in my space,
Right.
and
Right. Right.
so it is a delicate balance. And I know, like when my phone was broken last week, I said, okay, um, please show me, how to navigate with this, not
Hmm.
against it,
Hmm.
because, you still have to, earn a living, and,
Yeah. All those
like
things.
that's just,
Yeah.
it's just the realities. And,
Hmm.
but like I had a conversation last night and I was talking to somebody about we were talking about some of the predatory stuff happening in the spiritual communities and how I was instrumental on helping finally get one person who was a serial abuser and predator, banned from a particular group. And they were concerned. They said, well, how do we navigate this when if we already have low income overhead, low spread? And how do we balance the need to like it's still a business, we still have to make money if we're going saying, no, you can't be there, and blah, 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 blah. And I said, well, I've been in business for 20 years. And the first thing I did was grit out my office before I moved anything in here. I spoke to the ancestors. I spoke to my whole spirit team and asked them, set my intentions for the space on keeping it predator free, you know?
Wow.
And I said, and I'm still in business.
Right on.
And I said, and I've had other healers who have used my space make a comment saying, yeah, you don't get like hundreds of people showing up for an event, but the people that do show up are people that really are committed to doing the work, and like they're people that they would love to have in their everyday. And that really said a lot to me of I'm on the right path. Because I think it's so easy to just get discouraged, when we see so much oppression and so much, unhealthy things happening, especially in the spiritual communities, and especially with the growing predatory behavior in the spiritual communities. It's not lessening, it's growing. Right. And my response to that person was, well, that person that got banned removed one person, but added 6 to showing up to their events because all those women were banning his event because of the predator. Right. And we're telling other people to not show up. Now, guess what? Now you're opening it up and you're inviting from a place of conviction and determination of creating a safe space. Right. Now you're going to get people that you're not even thinking of instead of worrying about, well, if I let go one predator, like if you start going down there, you're leading from fear and you're also leading from enabling and contributing to the problem and not being part of the cure. Right. Exactly. And so just a simple reframing, they were able to get it and understand it and realized. And I said, well, this is why, like, if we're operating from a place of fear, then you can't make the changes that are needed to create a safe, but also flourishing, like what you really want to have. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And thank you for that leadership and for that take on it. And, let me just say, we started our conversation here just very kind of organically. And I'm just going to say it out loud right now that, my name is Ukumbwa Sauti. And this is probably what will be the first episode of Liberating Voices. And we're with Laura Bonetsky Joseph, and who runs Healing Trauma Through Spirit. And I just want to read, if I may, your quick intro that's on your Facebook page. And she's offering healing for trauma associated with abuse through spiritually based practices and therapies since 2006, offering speaking, guest appearances, workshops, and classes for individuals, groups, or organizations. And so there's the technical piece there. I wanted to make sure we do that so people know who we are here, as we invite them into this space. I also have a podcast called Triggers in Spiritual Medicine. So it's all about facing the triggers, addressing them, facing those hard truths, and then what's the medicine. Absolutely. And I'll ask you obviously to send me links so that I can put it at the end of this video, things like that, so people can connect with you and things that you're doing. So, already, we got a sense of kind of where you're coming from with some of the work that you're doing, and, kind of a general kind of take on how you approach things, which is really powerful. And I really appreciate that. And if you can say a little bit more about what healing trauma through spirit is for you. And also, I want us to get to that area that kind of sparked why we're here
at this time talking anyway about kind of what you're seeing showing up because of, systemic patriarchy, which you've already referenced. So, I so appreciate that it's already in the conversation, it's already in space. So, but yeah, can you say a little
Yeah.
bit more about healing trauma through spirit and what you're doing there?
So it's interesting because, well, healing trauma through spirit kind of started as a secondary arm to my primary business, which is healing with spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And what I realized is that, early on when I was doing a lot of healing work, people were coming with chronic illnesses or wounds that weren't healing, or, hey, I'm having to have multiple surgeries on my knee, only to find out that all these somatic issues were actually rooted in unhealed trauma.
Yeah.
And so it kind of started with that, as well as going through my own domestic violence journey, but also working and advocating in family courts for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. And then, I'm giving you like a quick 20-year bridge,
Yeah.
but
Thank you.
and so it's been like all these tentacles, I'm a multi-generational healer, and intuitive. I've learned everything I learned about holistic health and healing from my father, hence from his mother. And he was an osteopathic physician. So, and he was even taught the power of intuition as a diagnostic tool. Was part of the curriculum, believe it or not,
Mm-hmm.
in osteopathic medical training. That the founder of osteopathic medicine, Dr. Stills, recognized the power of intuition as a diagnostic tool. When that's the very thing that's actually increasing, and you and I are both old enough to see the changes in healthcare, where doctors aren't allowed to think or allowed to say, well, you know what, something just doesn't feel right. I don't care what the tests say. Because I've watched my father diagnose cancer when all the tests were negative. I've watched him diagnose appendicitis just with touch, and so, and learning about all the preventative stuff. So everything kind of culminated with that. And then I published 2 books. One book talked about the family court struggle and what it takes to break free from domestic violence, and how I was unlawfully incarcerated as a way to gag order me, to silence me, to discredit me from seeking freedom from abuse.
Yeah.
And kind of fast forward to, like, I keep wanting to pinch myself how I testified on 11 bills last year in Massachusetts. One of them, the last one I testified on, was on the coercive control and litigation abuse bills in September. And I thought it was kind of, well, was it funny? Was it not funny? But it was like, here we are. And I was the last one of the day. And I had all my speech written out of what I was going to say. And I don't even think I hit half of it, because I go up and I go, wow, it's almost 9 o'clock at night and we're still here and I'm the last. And if I'm the last, is that a coincidence or is it not? And how I've waited 20 years to be heard, to be seen, and to be witnessed, because this form of abuse doesn't end. And technically, I am still not free from my abuser until September of 2024. And it's only because my youngest will then become 21. So, he still has control. And, so it was fascinating that I was like, wow, like, is this a reason why I am the last? And maybe that voice will be the most impactful. And it was interesting because I thought I flubbed on me talking. And what I heard from others was, Laura, you're right. It never ends. It never ends. It never ends. Because I kept saying that, but I thought it was because I kind of lost where I was. But apparently that's what a lot of people heard, was that even after 20 years of leaving, I'm still not free, and it never ends unless something gets put into place. So that all those kind of things led into healing trauma through spirit, because what I've learned, now they have things like somatic experiencing and all these other things. But at the end of the day, for me, I started this journey 20 years ago, and it was doing spiritual practices that were rooted really in spirit that kept me sane. that helped me be in the center of a hurricane when I couldn't trust the system, when the very system I went to go seek my freedom ends up putting handcuffs on me and throws me in jail, denying my right to an attorney. And then you go, now what? Now what? So it's like when you have all those things and you don't know where to turn, it was the spiritual realm. And then through the years, I've learned and have found and sought out really rooted indigenous Japanese, indigenous American, indigenous Irish to help me really reclaim a lot of those missing things and to really help me through those indigenous teachings to unpack my other parts, right? The parts that I didn't recognize. Like, just because we say we have a good heart doesn't necessarily mean we're not perpetuating harm, right?
Absolutely.
So it's listening to my indigenous teachers, my Mayan teachers. I do have some Mayan teachers. And so it's, listening to them, and there was always a common thread. And a lot of it has to do with personal responsibility, accountability, doing the work, not making excuses, and really unpacking or decolonizing our mindsets, from what the toxic capitalist American consumer take, I'm entitled, I don't care if it's perpetuating harm on anybody else type of mentality.
Yeah.
And because I've always had this stance, if I have somebody that's desperate that wants healing, and I am, for instance, turning a blind eye to predators being in my environment, then how am I helping that person? If I'm not speaking out at a Reiki conference or at other drumming circles or other things where there are known predators there, and I am not speaking up on behalf of survivors, then how am I helping this trauma survivor that is coming to me for help? Because to me, it is, if you're going to do trauma work, you need to be doing all of it. And that's where the sacred activism comes in, right? So it's, you need to be doing all of it, or else you're not walking the talk.
Right.
Your silence is complicity, right? And it's a reason why we're seeing Ireland being probably the only Western country speaking out on the genocide of Gaza.
Right.
There is a direct correlation. I mean, they haven't been a free country for that long. So and there's also the duality, because also within the Irish, because of the trauma, like what we're seeing with some of the Israelis, that the trauma is so embedded, they actually became the oppressors too. So that we're seeing that duality play. There are some that get it and are doing that healing work, and then the other ones that are taking it, and doing the oppressing. It's the same thing like what we say, well, I was sexually assaulted, so I'm going to go sexually assault somebody else. Right. So it doesn't excuse the behavior. Just because you were a victim doesn't justify you being the oppressor or the abuser. Right. So you still have to take responsibility to how you show up.
Right. And thank you so much for that. There's such a fullness to how you've woven this story so far, out of so many pieces, to bring
Kind of
them
hard to do it
together.
in like slow and like a short.
Yeah, well, I appreciate this is why I appreciate conversations, because it allows us to get this kind of sort of, how some of the pictures that we take are now like little movies. You take a photograph and it's like 3 seconds of thing. That's kind of what we do in an interview or a conversation. We pull in something from outside the space and say, we're going to give it a little depth and breadth. And I think you're clearly doing that, and kind of helping us to see particularly some of the things that you've experienced and that you're working on, but also kind of helping us to weave some of the stories together and things that we may all be in different ways experiencing and seeing in the world today. And so I really appreciate that. And I just want to say out loud, while you were talking, Gracie, your dog, kind of popped up, and so we saw her head. Just so if people had a issue like, oh, what is that? is is that from the movie Predator or Alien or something like that? But I just want to say there was a dog back there. Beautiful, sweet dog.
She always
So
wants to be part of everything.
yes, but it's so interesting. She's like right behind you. We can't even see her. I don't know if that's like a pillow or something. Okay, but that's fine. Don't disturb her. That's that's
Hey,
great.
where are you?
I love it. But yeah, she just kind of popped up her head at one point. Said, "Yep, yep, okay, just checking." So yeah, thank you so much for giving so much kind of depth to the spiritual work that you're doing, and how you added in a sense, healing trauma through spirit because of what you saw, because of what you needed to do. And I'm wondering also if you can say a little bit more about some of the legislative work that you've been involved in. I know that's been a really big part of your life, and thank you for sharing those personal pieces of it.
Yeah.
But it sounded like what you were just mentioning was recent, and
Yeah,
I'm just
so
wondering if you could say a little bit more about that process.
so I don't know what the number is right now, but last year we had 70 pending domestic violence related bills.
Mm,
Unfortunately, since this, I think people have a misconception, and I know this actually triggered one of the advocates when I brought this up,
mm,
got very defensive.
mm,
And I said, we have a misconception of what, when the Supreme Court overruled Roe,
mm,
that it was about abortion.
mm,
And, I was very active. I was doing research and data, and I was actually very disillusioned by a lot of domestic violence shelters who were too afraid to speak out of what was happening in family courts
yeah.
15 years ago. And so in 2000, probably about maybe 8 years ago or so, I kind of stopped because, there was a Supreme Court ruling that happened that really took the steam out of things. And it was a Supreme Court that knowingly gave custody to a domestic abuser
Mm,
because they had more money than the mother. And I couldn't believe that in a Supreme Court case, money trumped safety. And so I decided just to stick with the healing stuff. And that's when the healing stuff did start to flourish. And then I kind of got called back in during the pandemic because of some of the research and data I did back then. And, I had like 15 interns working for me at the time,
wow.
way back then. So,
Wow.
and so when I was kind of called back in, and what I realized, and there's some colleagues of mine that are constitutional lawyers, and so a lot of this information that I have, I got from credible sources. It isn't like, oh, I just saw this on the internet. But
Yeah.
these people actually, this is what they do for a living. One of the colleagues actually sued the federal government because now we have Trump and we have Biden who both refuse to publish the ERA.
Mm,
So this is where it comes down to the Supreme Court when they overruled Roe. One of the number one reasons why they did it was because they did not say that women were a person in the Constitution.
mm,
They did not say that women. So basically, that set precedent that women are second class citizens. We don't have rights. Men have rights that supersede women. And this is why we're seeing the attack on women beyond abortion across the board. Everything from custody to increase, like we have an increased homicide rate of 40% since this happened in
mm,
Massachusetts on women. And so we have all these things. It's like the trickle down effect. So we have 70 pending bills. We also have, and one of the bills also on top of that is a moratorium on building a $50 million women's prison. As somebody who was wrongfully incarcerated, who I saw some of the women that were incarcerated, now this was 15 years ago, where they are today and how many judges, there's one judge in Plymouth County right now that is hell-bent on targeting all mothers and taking away custody. And I'm kind of like, I want to be, well, I mean, it doesn't matter, I have it on TikTok. So there's a whole thing with an agenda that they are using the courts. Now, this judge is not even supposed to be hearing cases because she was reprimanded out of the Worcester court after 2 survivors of abuse were murdered because she didn't believe them that they were victims of abuse. and was transferred to Plymouth. And every single case I have seen, now this is where the complicity of the state of Massachusetts, and I blame the governor. I don't care who was in office. I don't care if it was Baker or Maura Healey. Maura Healey has an obligation not to address the issue. And that is, why is this judge who's not supposed to be hearing cases, you can't even go in, there's no transparency, and go look up and see what this judge is doing, because none of the cases are in her name. They're in another judge's name. So that's a problem. And so when you have, and I got involved with trying to help, and I helped keep a survivor out of going to prison, similar circumstance to me, and I started seeing a pattern. And I said, you know, they're not building a $50 million women's prison because the old facility is dilapidated. They're building a $50 million women's prison because they're trying to reinstitutionalize what they gave up 100 years ago, and that's the incarceration of women for the sake of silencing them and disempowerment. And in family court, a judge can basically incarcerate you indefinitely with impunity. They don't have to have a reason. There's no justification, because the ACLU won't even touch a family court judge. So this is a problem. You have this issue, and I've been so far, I have been the only voice in that movement on the moratorium of the women's prison that has actually addressed the family court abuse on wrongful incarceration of women. A lot of the other activists focus on the criminal aspect of women. And I'm like, we can't help them if we can't help. We know blatantly how a family court judge can basically deny your right to an attorney, deny your right to fair due process, and incarcerate you for an indefinite amount of time with no just cause. Right. And this is like basic constitutionality, and we have a problem. And so this was some of the things that I testified on. We have a coercive control bill just passed. And so the next bill that we're trying to work on is the litigation abuse bill. Now, the litigation abuse bill it's a $1 billion industry. Right. Okay. So this doesn't impact necessarily low income families. This is where it impacts middle class, especially middle class and higher income families. And to give you an example of how it works, I'm going to share a quick story of my friend who passed away last year.
Sorry.
She was a former federal prosecutor for the governor's office in the state of New York. So somebody that is what? Educated, of influence, who's got connections. Okay. Mm-hmm. When she left her abusive husband, who was a corporate lawyer, he was the corporate lawyer for Samsung. Samsung ultimately did drop him as their attorney because of what he did to his wife. But over a 3-year period of time, he filed 3,000 motions, okay, in 3 years, spending $3 million. Okay, do the math on 3,000 motions in 36 months. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right.
It triggered her to have a relapse in her breast cancer. She started videotaping and audio taping her experience in the abuse. Like she showed one video where she was at home recovering from breast cancer surgery. And he's yelling at her saying, get up out of bed. I'm not taking the kids to school. You have to do it. Okay. And started calling her thing in front of the kids and started demeaning her while she was still recovering. So after her diagnosis, he decided to go in ex parte and use the system. He was able to buy judges. There's actually investigations going on where he was able to buy court officials to buy their, it's pretty kind of frightening of where the money trail really led to, where some people actually did finally some investigative work, that the judge was the so-called person that's supposed to be the non-biased person. Okay. Yeah. And then he's the one that got paid by the husband that's supposed to produce this non-biased report. Right. And so he went in, judge shopped, got an ex parte order that she's to have no contact with the children while she's dying from breast cancer. So she decided that the litigation abuse was so horrific that she can't fight cancer and fight him in court. So she flew to Switzerland and had legal euthanasia. shortly after.
Wow.
And so her only, and I'll never forget when she posted on Facebook, I immediately reached out to her. I said, Catherine, please tell me you didn't do this. Please tell me you're still here. And she never responded. And this isn't somebody that I met online. This is somebody I met in person. I resonated with her story many years ago. Her story was the closest that I had found. And I even did a TikTok saying that the only reason why I am alive today and I'm not dead is because my ex-husband didn't have $3 million to judge shop and buy his way in the courts. Yeah. So that is how litigation abuse works. Yeah. They're also using it for reunification camps to legally traffic children at $10,000 a day. And thank God, all you do is look up hashtag Maya and Sebastian in California and read their story. And it's because of Maya, who's a 15-year-old girl, that they finally got some of the bills passed, Peaky's Law passed in California. But the money lobbying industry, who makes $10,000 a day to keep her away from her protective parent, okay, for 7 months, they make a lot of money. They make millions and billions of dollars a year on harming our families. And so this is the big money lobbying that we have as a problem even in the state of Massachusetts, that there's a lot of pushback. And so we have a lot of work to do, but it starts grassroots. Like when I work with trauma survivors, I say, let's get you centered. If you're in a battle, we can't control the battle. So what we can control is how you show up to the battle. And a lot of learning how to surrender, and a lot of, you can't win against a corrupt system, but you can win your sanity. Yeah. Okay. So that's kind of like the paradigm. And the longer battle is using what's happening and saying somebody needs to audit the family courts. Why is the state intentionally not having transparent of what this judge is doing? Like, why is it that we cannot go in and see what this judge is doing? We can't audit because this judge is ruling with other judges' names being on the dockets.
Yeah, it's sort of a bureaucratic, technical lack of accountability, purposeful lack of accountability, to cover itself up and to obscure its own responsibilities. Yeah.
But it's what, and this is where, and I had this conversation with the client today where I said, she's like, well, I need to know where to go from here, because they were dealing with somebody, not them personally, but somebody in the family dealing with serious violent domestic violence. And unfortunately, the victim's too afraid to leave because and here's the thing, there's legitimate reasons why they don't leave. Okay. Because if they leave, they have an 80% chance of losing custody. That's a fact. Yeah. Okay. That's something that nobody wants to talk about. And so sometimes they stay because they feel like at least they can maybe protect their kids better than if they risk not losing custody. So it's not an easy battle. But I said, you might have to kind of turn away for a while and heal things from an ancestral line, because there's an ancestral history break with somebody who was a serial rapist in the family line. Yeah. So, and I said, this might be carrying over. If we can heal that ancestral line, you're going to be in a better place of power, and so will she. Right. So, but I also said it also means we have to unpack colonizer mentality, patriarchal conditioning, the toxic capitalist, the way things are, maybe some church indoctrination. And because here's the reality, I've worked with rape survivors. Why did they self-shame? Where does that come from? It comes from because it's been put on them that the culture says if you dress a certain way and you go into a bar and you have a couple of drinks, and you get raped, then guess what? You shouldn't have dressed that way. You should haven't maybe had a drink. You shouldn't have enjoyed yourself. Instead of saying, my God, who would do such a horrible thing to you? What job actually treats people that way? Right? And so this is the cultural construct, right? Of why, and then when I work with a rape survivor, that shame thinking is because of a belief system that was put on you. So
Right.
that's the stuff we have to unpack,
Right.
right? So and I've also, when we're dealing with like some of the criminal stuff, I've said to some survivors, and they go, well, I have so much anxiety, and then they get panic and they have all these triggers that show up saying, well, what if like, they had fear over, well, what if it's my responsibility if they get convicted or not convicted? And I said, here's the reality. Under the law, this is a crime against the state, and you were just their witness. Your job is just to go up there and share your story. Whether they are found guilty or not guilty is not your problem. Your problem is to share your story, to be heard, to be seen, to be witnessed, and then the rest we turn over, and then whatever's going to happen is going to happen. But when you come at it from that kind of perspective, you're coming at it from a place of power versus like, it's my responsibility if he goes to jail or not because of what it is. But if we just see it as, you're just the witness, it's not up to you on how well you testify. It's just,
Right.
just share your story.
Right.
If they go to jail, great. If they don't go to jail, great. You were heard.
Right.
You were heard.
Absolutely. And that story is important to say. And I mean, it was one of the some of the support I was giving to a client of my own around an impact statement that they were preparing in a sexual assault situation. And I want to say out loud that this is Sexual Assault Awareness Month also. There was no planning of this conversation for this
And it's
time.
also Child Abuse Awareness Month too.
Well, there you have it. There you have it. And whenever we kind of talk about these months, I appreciate that we have these times to focus on these issues, but it always just reminds me that it just means that we need to hold the focus all year round. That's our task, and that these months give us an opportunity to re-up and say, yes, this is still a persistent thing going on. This is still a persistent issue that we need to keep a yearly, daily, kind of awareness of, and for those of us who can and should, keep up our pressure on the system, the patriarchal system, the racist system, and the capitalist system that is oppressing us so deeply. And even as you tell your story there, I think about if we add the intersection of race into some of the stories that you're talking about around the courts and around sexual assault, how deeply some of this harm is even magnified in on the state level, and also in the interpersonal
Absolutely.
level, things like that. So I really appreciate, again, the multidimensional way at which you see all of this, even to the point of talking about how we heal our ancestral lines, which is also something that the modern colonial system tries to convince us is not a real dynamic in our lives. And if we simply look at most all of the indigenous cultures, and everybody has indigenous ancestors on the planet, but if we look at all of those cultures, as far as my studies have gone, all of them have a connection to their ancestors in a particular kind of way. They're not all the same, but
Yeah.
but they all acknowledge the lineage, the energetics of their ancestors, and how that makes them who they are.
Well, I would say I would beg to differ, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah,
So
please.
hopefully I can do this quickly and shortly.
Please.
But like, when you're talking about the intersectionality of race, I remember when I was moving last year and I went to U-Haul to get my rental truck. I don't even know how the conversation came up with the guys that were working there. And I don't even know how I even said how I was incarcerated by a family court judge. And the two of them looked at each other and they go, damn, a white girl? And it was like, and I started laughing. They go, and I was like, yeah. And I go, but there was like a sudden like bridge, that I understood their plight, they understood my plight. So one of the podcast episodes that I had on my podcast, I interviewed a friend of mine who was healing from breast cancer. And she was doing some really deep dives on healing. And what she realized was when she went back to work, it was the white women that treated her horribly, and it was the
Mhm.
Black women that actually rallied in support of her.
Mhm.
And so it made her really go and look at her ancestral lines, you know, and start looking at, and it really came down to the conclusion of how the burning times of witches influenced white women culture today. We did a whole podcast episode, and I was like, oh my God, that is it. Like,
Yeah.
because the one thing I have always seen, like I do
Mhm.
have some friends that are both immigrants as well as folks of color and that
Mhm.
are indigenous. And the one thing I've noticed was I see a very strong community, you know, and from their perspective, others may not see that, but from my lens,
Mhm.
I saw a very strong community in the BIPOC community or
Mhm.
the immigrant populations.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
People coming together, even if they didn't know anybody, people still came together and there's a rally of support.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
I even see it with Arnie being from, you know, from Ireland, and even the Irish, you know, I'm talking about the immigrant Irish, not
Yep.
those that have parents and grandparents. The
Yep.
immigrant population, same thing. And you could not even talk to that person maybe for 2 years, but something happens and they all rally together.
Yeah.
And that is not something I see with white women.
Yeah. Mhm. Right.
It is white women, and I'm talking generalities, so hopefully people don't get offended, but it was something
Oh,
I've had to sit with
it's what your
growing up
perspective has
white,
been. Yeah, that's
right?
fine.
Growing up white, growing up in a very upper middle class town.
Mhm.
There was a lot of competition. You are competition. And when you really look at what happened to the burning times of witches, women, white women especially, were encouraged to argue, fight, and sell out their sisters.
Yeah.
You know, so, and that aspect has not changed in the white women culture,
Right.
you know,
Mhm.
and so I mourn a lot of yearning and mourning over not having a community that I see with other communities that I wish I had
Right.
with white women.
Right.
And I feel like one of my clients said it the other day. We feel like orphans,
Yeah.
you know. Like I'm not an immigrant, but I'm also not purebred Irish. I'm not purebred, you
Mhm.
know. I'm Irish, Celtic, Russian, and Ukrainian.
Yeah.
So I'm not like accepted in any of those communities,
Right.
you know. And I'm not. Let's just face it. I'm not. Even though I am kind of accepted in some of my BIPOC communities, but I'm also not that, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Mhm.
it's like, where do I go? Where
Mhm.
does somebody who's craving this
Mhm.
go?
Yeah.
Right. And I've even tried, as you know, try to build community even in my area. And
Mhm.
it's a part of me wants to give up. I hate to say it,
Mhm.
because it's like trying to get people to show up for themselves
Mhm.
has been the most exhausting thing ever.
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting there going, why don't we know our neighbors? Like we just have a new neighbor that just moved in there from China. And I was chuckling. I go, okay. And I felt kind of bad. I'm like, is it Chinese, Japanese, Korean? Like, because he couldn't speak English.
Mhm.
So we were communicating through Google Chat.
Mm.
And later that night, you know, I was kind of saying, nice to meet you. And hopefully he understood what I was saying. Because I know when Google tries to translate my Japanese, it doesn't
Yeah.
translate really well.
Yeah.
So a lot of things can get confused. He showed up at the door like 2 hours later with 2 bottles of wine and 2 boxes of chocolate. And I'm like, wait a minute. Like, we're supposed to be doing that. I was waiting to
Mhm.
see when they were moving in with the moving boxes, you
Mhm.
know, so I can go
Mhm.
over and say, hey, welcome to the neighborhood, you know,
Mhm.
and I go, but that's what I'm seeing. Like, you're not seeing that with like your white neighbors so
Yep.
much, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I don't know how to. And it's not to say it's not happening. It just hasn't, I haven't seen it in my sphere,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
know, and, you know, really listening to how the burning times of witches influence white women culture today really hit me hard, because it really goes into all those constructs of cultural oppression, cultural misappropriation, to colonizer, like the entitlement factor. And like last year, when I was talking about having women's circles, I had one woman go, oh, are you doing Native American things? This is so exciting. I said,
Mhm.
I said, I'm only going to be bringing in things that I have permissions to do and teach.
Yeah. Right on.
Other than that, it's my own ancestral lines. And I said, we have to understand as white women that If you're going to use Native American, you should need to be doing it with permissions. And you also have to understand the genocide that is still ongoing, that rape and disappearance of Indigenous girls are like 3 times higher than white women. And nobody's investigating these things because a lot of them are white men going into Indigenous communities, okay, and getting away with it. And so I said, we cannot have their medicine with also understanding their pain. And that was the last time she was in the office.
Right. That happens a
because it
lot.
goes to,
Yeah,
I'm
you told the
sorry,
truth.
like, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's a hard reality because not everybody they want the medicine, but they don't want the hard reality behind the medicine.
Right. And thank you for all of that. And I want to kind of track back to how this conversation kind of started, this part of the conversation, because I think you had said, you take issue with, what I was saying about the intersectionality of race and things like that. I don't know that you disagreed. I don't think you did. I think
No.
what you did was you actually shared another element that comes from your perspective, between white women, and that you're actually speaking to another dynamic around, BIPOC women have often led the way in creating deeper senses of community within women and within the Black community also, the African community. But you did kind of speak to the intersectionality of race and gender, talking about Indigenous women, and of course that happens with African, British Black women also. So so again, I'm just saying, for anybody who wasn't tracking along with what we were both tracking along with,
and I just
there's more agreement there than maybe we had,
oh yeah, I mean,
say, and I think we're seeing things in a clear kind of way. Yep.
And I would just add that, like what I say when I speak to the whole white women stuff is, and the trauma piece is, I can't imagine being a Black woman or an Indigenous woman and going through the same thing, because I probably would be dead, or I wouldn't even have the housing that I have. So that's the reality of, I know people that are of brown skin that were denied rental agreements because of the color of their skin. So it's not to diminish. I see clearly as a small snippet of what I have personally experienced, and I empathize even more so of what Black and brown folks have gone through. I may not always even speak in the most eloquent way, but just know that at the same time, I am trying to do my best to show up and to see and witness and to help be a voice of correcting those white voices, and teaching them how to show up better and understanding. And that includes even when I do the domestic violence advocacy. One of the victims that turned advocate was trying to pass a bill, and she was frustrated. And I said to her, you are somebody that's blonde, upper middle class in an upper middle class town, and you really need to understand the Black and brown voices in those towns, in those communities. And until you do, you're going to wonder why you're beating your head on the wall. And I said, this is some of the unpacking. And, there was a lot of back and forth of, they said they understood, but they really needed to really, there's a difference between saying it, right, and actually,
absolutely,
I don't know what the right word is, but it's like really kind of getting it.
Yeah.
And so, but I said, you really want to understand why your bill's not moving anywhere? Go talk to some Black and brown voices and you'll find out why. I said, align with those communities and this is where you need to bridge the intersectionality and bridge and understand. So therefore, my whole thing has always been, why does it have to be just about this or just about that? Like even my podcast is like, what's the intersectionality? Our system wants Black voices to be divided from white voices. Why can't we be, I hear you, I see you, you're being witnessed on both sides, and how can we unite against the same enemy? Because at the end of the day, we have the same people that are oppressing both communities, it's the same enemy both times.
Yeah, for sure. And based on our identities, we have different situation on how we access that, how we sustain it, support it, or
Exactly.
resist it, and the resources that we have to resist it, things like that, which you've spoken to already. So,
Yeah.
you know, um,
I just always wish
it's far
like,
from me to mansplain what you just said,
yeah, but
but
I mean,
just
it's
to,
like,
yeah. Hmm.
it's like and maybe that's the optimist in me, regardless of what I've gone through, is I just envision, and I had another conversation with somebody today, and I said, like, look at the presidential election.
Hmm.
Nobody wants those two pity people running. Okay. At the end of
Hmm.
the day, I don't think anybody really wants those two people running. Okay. When you talk about the general masses, right?
Yep.
And I said, but people had an opportunity to choose alternatives,
Hmm.
and they let fear get in the way.
I think so too.
Okay. To shift those. Now it's too late to go back,
Hmm.
but we had an opportunity. And I think, and I kept envisioning, like, what would it be like if we had like all the Black and brown voices when we're talking about systemic racism and systemic
Hmm.
oppression and all those things, where, and yes, we're talking about slightly different things, like different mechanics. But from my perspective, what I hear the pains of the BIPOC community, it's the same pains I hear from a victim of sexual assault and domestic violence, right? So it's like, why? And it's the same perpetrator. It's the same perpetrator. So how can we like say, I honor your pain, I honor your pain, and in order for both of us to get what we want, we have to come together. And that's my thing, is like, how do we do that
Yeah.
when we also have grown to be a separatist country? Like, my individual needs supersedes, like, I don't give a fuck about everybody else, and or my
Right.
cause is more important than your cause. My trauma is worse than your trauma, or you're not a trauma survivor because my trauma was worse than that. There's no way you're got to be. And it's like, we as survivors are throwing daggers at other victims, and we wonder why we're not getting anywhere.
Right. Exactly.
And those
Mhm.
assholes, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
are like going all the way to the bank,
Mhm.
laughing,
Absolutely.
getting
Absolutely. Yeah.
wealthy
Mhm.
on our pain.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think my colleague, Dr. Jessica Taylor, said it perfectly. It's,
Mhm.
we have a system that is pathologizing, especially, I mean, she specializes in women's trauma, but she doesn't negate the trauma, because she does talk about the psychology, the invention psychology was really a way to oppress Black slaves when they were trying to break free from
Right.
their slave owners.
Right.
And that
Exactly.
was where the birth of psychiatry came from.
Right.
And then it became, because that was a way to institutionalize them,
Right.
and experiment. And then it became, well, now we're going to do that to women, right? Because women don't
Mhm.
want to be beat anymore. They're telling their husbands, like, you're coming home drunk. That's not acceptable, right? And she said, we pathologize women's trauma. And if we can just stop and say, you know what, why can't we just say, I hear you, I see you.
Mhm.
Yeah, your story is different than mine, but together we can both win if we can find a way.
Right, exactly. Thank you for that. And I'll say also that, yeah, that's some of the work that I do to help us understand, how these privileges and powers and, identity connections, and how we are situated within these systems,
Mhm.
works together and works against each other. And to work that out, that's why I consult in these areas. And also that, um, and where was I going with that now? Um, right. What was that brain fart you mentioned before? Yeah, yeah. Lovely.
Well, you were
Lovely.
consulting
Yeah,
about
yeah.
the
Oh boy. Yeah, yeah,
intersectionality.
yeah. Yeah. That's a great time to miss words. But what I think is really important here is that what you've said is very powerful in the sense that you're talking about the systems of this. And one of the notes that I'd written,
And we have it
very,
in healthcare too, by the way. So it's
oh,
healthcare too. So like, I can go
well,
down like the line, and it's like, the person that's not getting better and all the doctor wants to do is like, they're stripping doctors' ability to really figure out. I go, I have to take 3 sessions, sometimes an hour each,
yeah,
to really figure out what's going on with somebody. and a
Yeah.
doctor's only allowed to be there 5 or 10 minutes. How
Right.
the hell are they supposed to diagnose anybody in 5 or 10 minutes?
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
so we can go into all these systems and structures
Hmm.
that are really benefiting one demographic, and all of us, and they're targeting all of us to fight amongst each other instead of
Hmm.
saying, you know
Hmm.
what would happen if we've seen this in history, when the people unite and fight against those systems, right? I mean, it's like,
Absolutely.
it's not like it's brain surgery, but I struggle with why, with all the technology we do have, why can't we unite
Right.
a more united front? Like,
Right.
what is
Yeah.
preventing that?
Yeah.
Why is there, instead of
Yeah.
uniting, we've actually got an increase of misogyny, racism, abuse,
Hmm.
homicides, gun violence? Like,
Yeah.
it's really taken off in the past few years. And I
Yeah.
really think people are getting off on that. Like, I
Yeah.
seriously think there are people that are actually getting off on that.
Yeah.
And it's really
Mhm.
concerning. And I'm like, and then people get into fear mode and then they shut down. And I'm like, how we need, this is the time for us to rise. If we go and cower,
Mm. Mm.
then those systems are going to continue to strip away our rights,
Right on.
take away our constitution, take away, next is going to be the voting rights, which you're already seeing states
Absolutely
challenging
happening
that,
right now.
right?
Absolutely happening right now.
So
Yeah.
it's not like
Yeah.
it's, that it can't happen. It's already starting to.
Yeah. Absolutely. And as I was saying before, there was or about to mention before, there's a very short list of prompts that I had for us to have this conversation today.
Sure.
One of them was, your perspectives on patriarchy and how you see it moving through your life and work, which you already you already defined. And the point about getting to that is, one of the things that I do within my men's work, or I try to do, is to get men to understand the systemic nature of this. And what
Yeah,
I
it's not
try
it's
to
not a
do.
like you're the issue, right? It's
Yeah.
it's a, I mean, I will add to that
Mhm.
is, I grew up being the oldest, and my father, being first generation Russian Ukrainian, wished he had a boy because that's just
Mhm.
how it was. So he raised me like a boy.
Mhm.
So I actually grew up, and I used to say this, like, women are very catty bitches and the boys are the real thing. And so, and I look at how I contributed to that in my youth. And it wasn't until I experienced the family court abuse, I
Mhm.
still lived that kind of mentality
Mhm.
all the way up until I was faced with it head on, and saying, because I kept thinking, oh, yeah, the truth shall prevail. Like, no worries. Like, it's going to protect me because the law says so.
Right.
No, it doesn't, because
Right.
it's not how it works in family court. So I wanted just to add that for clarity, that I didn't always have those beliefs. I
Mhm.
was very much
Right.
part of the problem of patriarchal conditioning and white
Mhm.
privilege and all of that until I was faced with that.
Exactly. Thank you for that. One of the things I've always said for years, even with my higher ed students, is that if we think something's really important, where are the meetings? On this, I would always ask, where are the meetings on this subject? When are we taking the time, to sit in the spaces with each other, to learn from each other, to hear each other's stories, and to work on, with our best practices, our best knowledges, our best research, our best trust of people who are affected by these systems the most deeply, as you're mentioning tonight, or today. And so when are those happening? So and I think in the interest of, you know kind of wrapping up this conversation at this moment, and I always hope that every conversation is the catalyst for another conversation,
Oh,
and is a
absolutely.
catalyst for more action, and for manifestation of righteous things happening. But I wanted to ask you if there are three things that you think we should be having, and maybe particularly within the patriarchal patterns that you've been talking about today, but it could be anything. What are like three kind of elements that you feel are important to have in these conversations, that we kind of can't do this without having these issues in there? And I know there could be 100, but I'm
Yeah.
just going to ask, like, what might be the first three that come up?
Okay. So I don't
for
know if
you?
this is 1, 2, and 3, but like the first thing
Yeah.
is, first of all, we have to learn to stop, pause, breathe. And what's the action step? So that action step can be, maybe you are so trigger happy and you have a challenge with listening.
Mhm.
And I think, we have to have the conversations of, you know, geez, I'm listening to this person's Black voice talk about how they didn't, like, I'm just thinking about a podcast episode that we had, where this person I interviewed, where they didn't really even know as a Black person what racism felt like until they went to high school and they were faced into it,
Mhm.
which then led them into substance abuse, which then led them into drug dealing, which then led them into incarceration. And then now they run one of the most prolifically beautiful places for healing for people recovering from addiction in the state of Connecticut. So it's like,
Mhm.
but you know, for me, it's like I see commonality. Like I'm hearing this, yeah, they're talking about systemic racism, but I'm like, but I have the same effects from dealing with family court and how I was ousted and I was judged and I was ridiculed. So I think it's, how can we not, acknowledge somebody else's pain and find the intersectionality without saying my trauma is worse than your trauma.
Right. Mhm.
So I think that's like the first thing is finding ways to bridge voices. And I think, like, I mean, we see it with the Women's March, why we stopped having the Women's March in Boston, because it was like every single certain demographic felt like their voice was more important than that voice. And it's just
Mhm.
saying, how can we bridge the voices together,
Mhm.
and the intersectionality. And I think the other thing is using your traumatic experience or your story as a catalyst to make a change, but not, how do we, like, people say, well, Laura, why do you do what you do? I go, my situation isn't going to get fixed, but I can use my story, what I went through for 20 years in the system, to make it safer for somebody else's child.
Mhm.
So I think we sometimes see, well, I'm over it now, so I'm just going to move on with my life, instead of uniting with those that are still going through with it. So that's the second one, is that
Right.
conversation. Is you went through that experience for more than one reason. And if you don't do anything with that reason to be a change for somebody else,
Mhm.
then it's a wasted experience. And not really a wasted experience, but
Mhm.
you're not really contributing to help the whole, right? The whole
Right.
collective, right?
I hear that.
And I think the third one is, I have been, well, I wouldn't say pretty successful, but it took me 8 years to get this one abuser
Mhm.
banned. But
Mhm.
my whole agenda was that abuser has no power without the enablers and the bystander abusers contributing to the problem.
Absolutely.
So it's addressing our individual roles of complicity to being part of it. We're either part of the problem or we're part of the solution.
Right.
We can't be both.
Right. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's a powerful set of things to consider for sure. And I hope that people have, you know, really feel that, to take that forward into their lives and to move what they're doing forward. It reminds me of a quote from the movie Spotlight, which is about the Roman Catholic sexual abuse cases in Boston. And one of the quotes that has stuck with me the most, and actually a video that I'm going to be posting soon, is entitled Spotlight, and a few other things. But it's based on that, inspired by that. But what one of the characters in the movie said was, if it takes a village to raise a child, it takes a village to abuse one. And I think it's such a powerful statement about what you just said, about
Exactly.
that,
Mm.
predators, of any kind, or whatever system of oppression they're working through, only get to do so because so many of us allow that to happen. Yes, they groom us, they prepare us to protect them when they are bad actors again, when they harm people. But if we don't speak out, speak up, speak forward into these systems. And that's why I ask men to gain the vocabulary that helps us to talk about patriarchy, that talks us to resist patriarchy, not only on the outside, but on the inside,
Yeah.
so that we can be real advocates and allies and accomplices, for the women in the LGBTQ family, and our loved ones in the world and our children in the earth. So,
And I
yeah,
think
I
I
think
would,
that's a really powerful statement of yours, that we have to look out for that, or the ways that we are complicit with the systems that we're
yeah, I
within.
mean, because that is where, when I wanted to speak out, that is where I targeted. Like I targeted conferences that were knowingly allowing
Yeah.
predatory keynote speakers. And I said, I'm going to, if you allow this, I'm going to use my privilege, my voice, and my position as an expert in X, Y, and Z to tell everybody to not, why not to support you, that
Right.
you are knowingly
Right.
allowing this to happen.
Right.
So you can't say you don't. So like this is where, like, and some people go, I can't say that, I can't do that. And I'm like, if you don't have a backbone and you can't stand up, because that's somebody else's child. Because if that was your child, you'd be like, why isn't somebody defending my child? Why isn't somebody protecting my child? Right.
Mhm.
You know, and it goes to the other component too, like where I was saying, like, my trauma is worse than your trauma. When it comes to folks healing from their trauma, it is not permission to go and create a business model and be an expert on healing trauma for others, because that's a whole other avenue that is like reeking of white privilege, of colonizer mentality, capitalist things, that it's not like, just because of what you went through and you've recovered or whatever doesn't mean that you are an expert. Because I have seen a lot of very well-intentioned people, like they're not like bad people, they're just, they it's just a mentality, it's our cultural conditioning, that they think that they can go and work on other people with trauma, and they don't understand that that's a problem without training and skill sets.
Right.
So
Yeah.
so just be mindful of that, like you're still kind of in the student mode, and to really learn how to really help somebody through trauma. Literally, I mean, I've been doing this 20 years. I feel like I'm just starting to really get it.
Yeah.
So if you're just coming out of the gate and you're still in the mess, you can't call, like, it's just, I've just seen so much harm,
Yeah.
again, by people that think they're doing good, but they're doing good for money.
Yeah.
So it's, this is where I would say, like, you don't have to refer them to me, but refer them to somebody who actually has the skill sets, especially maybe an elder,
Right
because I
on.
think that is where respecting the elder wisdom and the training, especially when we're dealing with trauma, we need to bring that back.
Right on.
We need to bring that back.
Right on. Thank you. And Laura Benetsky Joseph, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And one of the things I've just noticed, and it's very convenient for me because I named what I believe this will be the first in a series of, I named it Liberating Voices. And what you just recently said was a way in which we can use our voices for liberation, how we can develop our liberating voice. And you've worked as an example, you've been here as an example of your own liberating voice, and I so appreciate that. And it's, if a very convenient selfish validation of what,
Well,
but of this name that's been around for a long time for me, Liberating Voices. So thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for your work. Thank you for your empathy in the world, and your fire and your power and your love in the world. And I really appreciate where you've been coming from. Thank you.
well, I really appreciate being invited to have this conversation. I'm not going to shy away. So,
I know that.
I would just say, let's turn our triggers into a power, and let's turn courage, turn our fear into courage. and let's rise up together as one voice, because we have a growing problem, and it's going to take us to unify to fix it.
Right on. Great last words. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm Ukumbwa Sauti, and this is Liberating Voices. And where is Gracie? I'm like,
Hey,
where
Gracie.
is,
Hey,
I'm like,
look at that.
okay, we need to do a
Here we go.
third
Come on.
one
Here
because
we go.
Gracie needs to be in the third.
Here we go.
Maybe if we have you back another time. Hi, Gracie. Sorry to wake you up, but I just missed you.
Well, she just got squirted by a skunk for the third time
Oh,
yesterday.
no.
Third time because she thinks she can, I just realized because she just came up. I'm like, yep, you still kind of have that smell right in the snout.
Learning lessons. We're all
Right?
learning
But yeah,
lessons.
I'm like just in the past year, that's 3 times.
Wow.
She had to try to go roll with a with a skunk.
Okay.
Right?
Okay. All
That's
right.
why,
Well,
she is the epitome of a teacher on consent and boundaries, by the way. I tell all my
okay.
clients,
Uh-huh.
they go, well, will she come? I go, I don't know. It's consent and boundaries. If she says yes, then she will. If she won't, she won't.
Okay.
That's just it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. I appreciate that. Thank
But
you, Gracie.
she's definitely a teacher on that, but she also earned the name little fucker too to boot. So
Little fucker.
little fucker.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha.